Okay, so our next unit of work is about converting between our bytes and our kilobytes and our megabytes and our gigabytes. So as I've got here, it's really important to have a sense of how big a meg is or gig is for our everyday life. And you would have already known these terms before when you're looking at your mobile phone, what your plan is, how many gig you have. And another example here is our iPods. So our iPods can range from, say, just a small 2 gig iPod Shuffle that can hold about 250 songs to 160 gig iPod Classic that can hold about 40,000 songs. So it's looking at, well, what's the difference between a 2 gig and 160 gig? Um, and it's not so much important to know the exact amount of bytes in that for our everyday life, but just a sense of, well, how big is that? But in terms of mathematically, we need to know how to convert between bytes and kilobytes and megabytes. So we have a table on this next page that shows us our conversions. But to be able to get there, so remember that we did in our last lesson that we looked at that 1 kilobyte is 1024 bytes. So you remember me saying that it's really important to remember that number, that 1024. That 1 kilobyte is not 1,000 bytes, but 1024 bytes. Just to note here though, it's important you may come across companies starting to define a kilobyte as 1,000 bytes just for ease for their companies, for different products that they have, just trying to make it easier. However, that's strictly not true, and in terms of our syllabus, we do need to convert exactly, which is 1024. So let's look at how we go about doing that. So this table here, this graph, I guess, is your key to how to convert, to remember. But really all you do need to remember is 1024. So let's have a look. Let's complete the following conversions. 220 megabytes to kilobytes. So we're starting here at megabytes and we're going to kilobytes. So we need to go through that arrow and you need to follow the arrow. We don't go above here because that would be going against the arrow. So we can see here megabytes to kilobytes. We're going to start that. We have 220 megabytes and we're going to convert that to kilobytes. So what we need to do is we need to follow that arrow, which is multiplying by 1024 to get us to kilobytes. And when we do that on our calculator, we get 220 multiplying by 1024, and we come up with 225,280 kilobytes. So writing that here, 225 280. Now it's really important that you put your units at 80 kilobytes. Make sure you put that kilobytes and it's in capitals. So our next one, starting at kilobytes, and we're going to bytes. So we're at 72 kilobytes. How many bytes is that? So we're going to start here at kilobytes and we're going to go to bytes. So 72 kilobytes equals 72 times 1024. And when we do that on our calculator again, we get 72 times 1024. We get 73,728. 28, and don't forget you need to write bytes. Capital B for bytes, smaller case b for bits. Now starting at 30 gigs and going to kilobytes. So here we are going to start at gigabytes and we're going all the way to kilobytes. So it's two steps, two arrows that we are following. So it just means that we need to do it twice. So looking 30 gig to kilobytes, 30 times 1024 times 1024. And remember that is going to kilobytes. So this will be our answer to kilobytes. Once again, when you do that on your calculator, you're going to get a very large number. You're going to get 31,457,280 kilobytes. And you can check that yourself on your calculator. Okay, that is supposed to be a kilobyte. KB. Now we're going from kilobytes to megabytes. So this time we are going backwards. So we're going kilobytes to megabytes. So a megabyte is a larger unit of storage, so we're going to divide. So far, we've multiplied because we're going to smaller units. So a kilobyte is smaller than a megabyte. A byte is smaller than a kilobyte. A kilobyte is smaller than a gigabyte. But here, a kilobyte is smaller than a megabyte. A megabyte is larger than a kilobyte, so we're going to divide. If you get confused, you can always just follow those arrows. However, you will need to remember it at some stage, whether you are dividing or multiplying, because you won't be supplied with these arrows in any exams. So 1536 kilobytes to megabytes, we're going to divide. 1536 divide by 1024. And we're going to end up an answer of megabytes. That is going to be 1.5 megabytes when you do that on your calculator. So, to our next examples. We're now going to go from a 4 gig to bytes. So we're going to go from gig all the way down here to bytes. So it's 3 steps. So it's going to be a very, very large number. So let's look at what we're going to do there. We're going to go 4 gig equals how many bytes? We're going to do 4 times. Now I could write 1024. I could write times 1024 like here, and times 1024 and times 1024. Or because I'm timesing 1024 3 times, I can just do that to the power of 3, saving us having to write all that out. And on your calculator, when you're using to the power of, it'll be similar buttons on your calculator. It's the power button to the power of 3. And you're going to get a very, very, very large number. So let's write that down. So it's going to be 4 billion, and then our large number that follows. 294, 967, 296 bytes. Okay, so now we're next example going from gigabytes to terabytes. So once again, a terabyte is a larger unit than a gigabyte, so you are dividing. Okay, but once again, just follow those arrows. So 512 gigabytes equals how many terabytes? We're going to divide by 1024. And when you do that on your calculator, you're going to end up with half or 0.5 terabytes. So remember, these answers don't make any sense unless you have the units in there. So now on to a problem, a worded problem. So one that we're going to find in our everyday lives that you'll need to know how to solve, and ones that will be very common in your exams. So we have calculate the number of MP3 files of average size 4.1 meg that can be stored on a 16 gig MP3 player. So the first thing to note here is that we've got two measurements but in different units. We've got megs and we've got gigs, so megabytes and gigabytes. So we need to transfer those into the same units. So what we're going to do, so we just better write that down, that we need to remember to convert into the same units. Convert to same units. So what we are going to do is ultimately what we want to know is how many 4.1s can we fit into 16 gig. So how many average size songs, 4.1 songs, can we fit into 16, the whole MP3 player. So we're going to change our 16 into megabytes. So we can divide through how many can fit into, divide into. So we're going to change our 16 gigabytes into megabytes. So 16 times, okay, so we have going from back up here, gigabytes to megabytes. We're going to go from here to here. So we're multiplying by 1024 on your calculator. That will come up to be 16,384 megabytes. Okay, so therefore, how many 4.1s can we fit into 16,384? So our number of files or number of songs or whatever it might be. In this case, they've talked about files, so we need to use that terminology. Number of files equal to 16,384, dividing it through by 4.1. And that equals, when you do that on your calculator, let's have a look, doing that on our calculator, 16,384 divided by 4.1. So we're going to get 3,996, but it's 0.097. Now, it doesn't make sense to store a 0.09th of a file. So that means we can only store these 3,960 files. You can't round it up. You can't store more than that. You can only store 3,996 files. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Next lesson we'll be going on and looking at conversion to bits from our bytes.